Month 3, September 2022, OBX. So, college was not where any of them wanted to be just then. Not Sarah, with her ambition of history, Orky with social and political studies. Even Pope, who had been offered a second scholarship opportunity, did not feel like he wanted to study. My family, all together, JJ told them, as he strolled to the Brooks's marina. A lot of tourist trade came in the early weeks of the academic year, from retired rich people keen to avoid the family's heavy time of June and July. We get this one chance to make it with our lives, Sarah had said. Agreed, he replied. I want us to make a pact that we use this year to turn our lives around. Give us a chance at a future. She glanced to JJ. Wherever that may be, the opportunities just don't come when you're older and got to hold down a job. Got to get our heads down and onto it. And the Pogues agreed. This was the year they were going to make it count. All of them were back in 12th grade, all of them with an improvement program. Pope was working doubly hard to resubmit his scholarship application while Cleo was working at the Hayward's fish store. JJ? He had ambled over to the Brooks boat hire, mainly because of an opportunity for easy money taking charter trips, but also because he could not forget Aiden Drummond. He had left, and not returned to the Cameron job. What was he doing? Of course, he may not be entirely accurate, he mused, remembering the evening of they had fought. He had fought dirty. Yet, this was the 2020s. Pronouns were not straightforward these days. But JJ made good his vow with the rest of the Pogues that he would attend school and work as hard as he could. His grade average had gone up, and the principal had called him into his office one morning. Expecting a grilling, JJ had made sure he could see the Twinkie, so he could make a run for it and hotwire it if he couldn't take it anymore. But the principal was full of praise for his work ethic, his tenacity, and pleased that he could put his past behind him. You're staying at the Cameron's house? She had asked, checking his school records. Chateau Maybank is a burned-out shell, Mom, JJ replied, not answering the question, but stating a fact so clearly that it sounded like it. The principal had known JJ Maybank for nearly 4 years, but she chose to put it to one side just then, choosing instead to focus on the young man's grades again. If JJ Maybank was pulling out a B average, his home life, whatever it must be just then, must be working for him. When he was not studying, JJ was tinkering around for people, doing jobs on vans and cars, and, most recently, taking the Brooks charter boats out beyond the reef for the best fishing. At the 30 level, at the 50 level, they were now asking for JJ. His reputation for finding the best fishing spots was growing, and so was the stash of money he was keeping at the old place, in an old storm shelter with a lock on it. He had the key, and it was safer than houses. Better, would be the bank, but obviously, the IRS would start to ask questions. Now, with the weather still warm, the mellowness of fall was coming close around them, with that crispness to the air and the sea mists in the mornings. And it was true, JJ mused, as he walked from his home to school, having just cleaned out the boat shed for Mr. Brooks. Aiden Drummond, who still rented a room from them, he had checked, had not been back to Tanny Brook, or the Camerons had not been seen since the day after the storm. 88,888,888. Month 4. Because he was spending his time, and what little money he had still on him, in the tiny library at Hatteras. Library might have been pushing it, but it still contained records about the local area, mainly shipping information. Aiden had discovered many manifests from when there had been a port at the peninsula, before it had moved up the coast towards Avon. One morning, having dodged JJ, who had come early to take out weekend tourists on the charter boats, Aiden had walked all the way down to Hatteras and had, predictably, been too early for the tiny brick-built building to open. Another man had also been waiting, dark-skinned, dreadlocks, eyes bright, inquisitive, and also nosy enough to ask Aiden his business. Same as you, I reckon, he told the man, who turned out to be a Mr. Sun, who turned out to be a history teacher at Kildare High. Ships, Aiden told him. No kidding, Devon's son said to Aidan, the royal merchant. Everyone wanted that one, I guess, Aidan replied. It was too early in the morning for his accent to have woken up, and though he could have ignored the man, Aidan couldn't help but liked the easy-going Mr. Sun. It was a pity the gold was now under a mountain in a Swiss bank vault owned by Ward Cameron, now, presumably, by Rafe Cameron. You not in school? He asked Aidan. Not exactly from here, he told the man, vaguely. Here for my own reasons. So is everyone in the Outer Banks, Mr. Sun told him. You don't got to tell me anything. It's great to know you like history, though. Like history, thought Aidan Drummond, as he looked through another shelf's worth of papers, took a sheaf and sat by the small window and began to examine them. The curator watched him go, and then turned to look back to the pile he was working through. The boy had been coming for weeks, watched him sit, as he always did, with notebook. This time, Mr. Sun sat at another table, with the Kildare town documents, from which he was researching more about Tannehill. At first, Don Pfeiffer looked at the youth, his hair to his shoulders, jeans and boots, shirt and denim jacket, and wondered whether half the collection was going to survive. But he had spoken so nicely to him, with polite enthusiasm about the maritime documents, that Pfeiffer had let him in and kept a cautious eye on him, as he took the most recent, from 2003, and sat, with a notebook, writing down details, thanking Mr. Pfeiffer and asking if he could come back the next week. It wasn't just the next week, it had been every Saturday for several weeks. Where he came from, Don Pfeiffer didn't know, or care. But he had a mildness and keen intelligence about the source materials that meant he was almost part of the place now, and when he hadn't come in one Saturday, after the storm, it seemed strange Mr. Pfeiffer had missed him. Aidan nodded to the curator as he unlocked the door, and went to the next bundle of pages, which were ship's manifests from 1978, took them over to the window, nodded to Mr. 30 and began with a log for a ship called the Liberty, a large cargo ship which had been bringing timber down from Canada's east coast to North Carolina for the house-building boom that had, apparently, taken place in the late 1970s. As the end of the day neared, and Aidan contemplated his walk back up the coast, and how he was going to dodge J.J. Maybank, for his timing would coincide with the returning charter boat, he said good evening to the curator, who was now looking under the counter for the tiny library's key. Found what you were looking for yet? Mr. Pfeiffer asked Aidan. To be straight, I ain't sure what I am looking for yet, Aidan replied, cringing at the accent he had put on. I'll just know when I see it. He was half a mile up the coast when, dawdling his way along the track that had the sand on one side and a road the other, when a car pulled over to him. It was Mr. Sun, the history teacher, who had left the inn. He leaned over the passenger side seat and called to him out of the window. If you're going to Kildare, I can take you back, he told Aidan. At once, a sense of panic overtook him, and he glanced about. Mr. Sun hadn't caused the fear, merely the prospect of hitchhiking. That, and the idea that, if he got back to the Brooks too soon, J.J. Maybank would be there, coming in with his fishing tourists, and he did not want to risk a fight with the young man. That, and he had a lot on his mind, since he had discovered the name Limbry that very afternoon, Geoffrey Limbry, who had imported lead ore from Missouri, an expensive business in the Great Depression, and had it brought all the way from the middle of America to Charleston. Began Aidan, and thought of the walk back, thinking of why lead ingots would be taken down the Missouri River, into the Mississippi, into the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida and up to South Carolina. Mr. Sun turned off the car, and Aidan asked the question. If it went that way, it would have avoided customs because it would have been classed as internal trade. It would have been better coming by sea because of the weight. Why? What are you looking for? Maybe I could help? To Aidan found himself backing away. All right, Mr. Sun added, defensively, leaning back. But, before he could put his foot on the accelerator to leave, Aidan had crossed to the car window. How much do you know about the Queen Anne's Revenge? Aidan asked, surprising himself. He had sworn, when he had arrived at the OBX, that he would never tell anyone. But, he had to know. for it had been a Harold Limbury who, in 1933, had hosted a party at which Charles Blackbeard, South Carolina's governor, had been in attendance. Was that the same party at which a skull had appeared, and been used as a drinking vessel? Edward Teach's skull? This had been recorded with the shipping inventory on one River Cruise, the merchant ship that had brought 8 tons of lead to Charleston. Although, Aidan had been thinking about this, and whether a human skull could be used to drink anything out of. Surely any liquid would just seep out of the eye and nose sockets. "What do you want to know?" Mr. Sun asked, leaning back. "Because I do know a good deal. I teach it at the high school." He glanced at the seat beside him. "Wanna hear about it on the ride up?" "I have my teacher's license in the trunk, with my work," he added. Aidan conceded, and slipped into the passenger seat, grateful legs thanking her brain for making that decision. "Where you wanna go, anyway?" he asked. "The Brooks boat hire." Mr. Sun glanced at Aidan as he changed gear and whistled, shaking his head. "Don't got to think you ain't was gonna get there until the mornin'," he told Aidan. "Well now, the Queen Anne's Revenge. You know about Queen Anne's War, right?" Abashed, Aidan admitted he hadn't. If the aim of that particular war was to decimate the indigenous population, who fought on both sides, it was a success. Otherwise, the French in Florida and the English in Carolina gained little territory off one another. He was there, as a sailor, fighting for his country. Edward Teach, Mr. Sun told Aidan. "Bristol born, that's Bristol, England," he emphasized, literate. He was aboard slave ships before the war, and was recorded as being aboard a British naval ship in Queen Anne's War, fighting off the coast of Carolina. Devon's Sun looked pointed with one hat to the coastline. "He fought here, beyond OBX, repelling the repeated Spanish incursions up from Florida, in retaliation from Joseph Blake's policy of southern expansion. After the peace, the Treaty of Utrecht, he joined Henry Jennings on Jamaica, raiding the rich pickings of the shipping lanes, moved to the uninhabited New Providence. Then, he joined Benjamin Hornigold on the Bahamas as a privateer. Hornigold gave Teach a sloop and they both engaged in piracy. Havana, Bermuda. Madeira. Then joined by Stede Bonnet. "The gentleman pirate?" Aidan asked. He wondered when the man would be mentioned. Aidan had had a book of tea cards given to him by Mr. Drummond, one of them a wild-haired, Georgian-dressed man before a ship, looking menacing and waving a cutlass. After that, there was no stopping them. It was on raid just out into the Atlantic, off the coast of the Bahamas, and they captured a French ship, La Concorde, and renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge. It was from there he got the reputation for tying fuses into his hair and beard, and setting his thick hair and black beard with fuses, lighting them and terrifying his opponents. "What made him of interest to me," Devon's Sun told Aidan, as they crossed the causeway between Kildare's southern island to the north, "is the freed slaves, who joined him. He was prepared to offer money, of a sort, reward for services rendered. Services being the stopping of ships in their lawful business and ribbing them. But for his crew's health he would have continued. But some of his men had fallen ill." Teach blockaded Charlestown, stopping vessels from entering, ransacking them. He put up black flag with white skull on and blood red flag, claiming crew were ill and in need of medical attention. First use off skull to represent pirates. The crossed bones were added later, if at all. Sun told Aidan. If no medical attention was forthcoming, he told the governors represent all inhabitants would be killed and their heads sent to the governor, Samuel Ra. He sent a Mr. Marks, a freed slave, to deliver this message. Ra agreed to Teach's demands, and a Mr. Marks and 2 pirates were given 2 days to collect the drugs. Teach moved his fleet, and the captured ships, to within about 5 or 6 leagues from land. 3 days later a messenger, sent by Marks, returned to the fleet. Marks's boat had capsized and delayed their arrival in Charlestown. Teach granted a reprieve of 2 days, but still the party did not return. He then called a meeting of his fellow sailors and moved 8 ships into the harbor, causing panic within the town. When Marks finally returned to the fleet, he explained what had happened. On his arrival he had presented the pirates' demands to the governor and the drugs had been quickly gathered, but the two pirates sent to escort him had proved difficult to find. They had been busy drinking with friends and were finally discovered, drunk. Teach kept to his side of the bargain and released the captured ships and his prisoners, though they were lighter of valuables than they had been before they were captured, shall we say? Chuckled Sun. The irony of it all was the cotton used for these clothes was more than likely picked by those freedmen, who were now in Edward Teach's company. Before he left Charlestown, Edward Teach discovered that a captain by the name of Woodes Rogers had been given a privateering license with just one name, to purge the West Indies of pirates. He had men of war, and Teach knew that if it came to an out-and-out battle, he would lose. So he took his ships northward along the Atlantic coast and into Beaufort Inlet, just up there. Sun pointed to the right and up the coast. But then, the Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground on a sandbar, cracked her mainmast, damaged her hull, and when trying to free the flagship, Israel Hands of THW Adventure also ran aground. The other pirates left, with Stede Bonnet, but rumor has it that Teach and Hands intentionally ran the ships aground to reduce the fleet's crew complement, increasing their share of the spoil. So they took their treasure and settled in Bath Town. They were offered a royal pardon, but you know, neither man takes it, and within a month they were back pirating off this very coast. They met Charles Vane, who had been pursued by Teach's old commander, Benjamin Hornigold, who was by then a pirate hunter. Teach and Vane spent several nights on the southern tip of Ocracoke Island, with Israel Hands, Robert Deal and Mary Read, and Bonnie Calico Jack. Interrupted Aidan Drummond. It was now that his adopted father's story came to the fore. He had been to Ocracoke, the name which had been in his mind for so many years, attached to the story of Teach's tale. It was the point he had seen when the ferry had come back from Charleston, just along the coast from Hatteras, and the library. You do know this history, then? Devon's son asked Aidan. A little, Aidan admitted, coyly. But not enough. Do you know more, Mr. Sun? It is truly a fantastic tale. Well, yes, I do, Sun told him, as he changed gear. It was at that moment that Teach and the pirates attracted the attention of Alexander Spotswood, governor of Virginia, who arranged for their capture, suggesting that the crown might benefit financially from Teach's loot. Spotswood personally financed the operation, possibly believing that Teach had fabulous treasures hidden away. One Lieutenant Robert Maynard of HMS Pearl was given command of two commandeered sloops. Maynard found the pirates anchored on the inner side of Ocracoke Island, and immediately he stopped all traffic that might have warned the pirates. On the other side of the island, Teach was busy entertaining guests and had not set a lookout. With Israel Hands ashore in Bath with about 24 of Adventure's sailors, having not replenished the crew since the grounding. This was to be to their dire advantage. Pistols cracked all over the place, until all the pirates were wakened. The Adventure eventually turned her guns on the two ships and fired, devastating Maynard's force. But it was no good. Blackbeard, in one final swan song, lit his beard with fuses, and fought to the death. Hands lost his life too along with Deal. Mary Read, Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham were imprisoned. The pirates of history disappeared, only to reappear in legend. Aidan told him. Sun turned his head and nodded. You are wise, he told him. But, do you know why the Blackbeard story has persisted so long? Gold. Gold. Devon's son nodded. Kildare was ahead of them, and Aidan felt his stomach clench at his admission. But, he had spent months trying to do this on his own. And was it more dangerous than the information he had had about Venezuela? It had taken the man months to recover, so Aidan had heard, from the poisoned arrow. But it is only a legend. More than likely, Edward Teach was impoverished and had no treasure at all. Aidan waited for a second, just a second, and shook his head. You don't think? Devon's son asked. Why? From his shirt, Aidan pulled the Queen Anne sovereign. Some say he had gold. A lot of gold. Money, not bullion. Well, there's a thing, Mr. Sun told Aidan, handing it back to him. And you think it's here? Somewhere. Ocracoke. Perhaps, Aidan told the history teacher. Or, another place that might need tons of gold for an underground vault. He watched the man's face change as he worked it out. But, rather than pursue the information or push a confession from Aidan, Son said, "Mind you look after that, young man." "We are here, at the Brookses." As Aidan turned to go, Son leaned out of the window and added, "And, well, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday." "Next Saturday," Aidan said to Mr. Son. So Aidan went back to the Brookses, lingering by the boathouse, watching for J.J. Maybank to stroll arrogantly away from the boatyard, then went into the Brookses' offices. Mrs. Brooks was cooking a stew from the catch that had been brought back in that day, and Mr. Brooks told Aidan that he was glad he wasn't at Tannehill, and did he know that Mr. Campbell, on the mainland, was looking for help with building work on his jetty?